Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the USC Annenberg panel on the next jobs in journalism. I'm Gabriel Kahn. I'm on the faculty at USC Annenberg. This is a topic that we care deeply about because we are in the business of training people for this profession. And as you all know, and as you've all heard over these past 3 days, this is a profession that is changing at an incredible pace. The next jobs in journalism is obviously a very important topic. I think that, the career trajectory in this profession used to be straightforward. Now it is anything but. I'm also very curious to hear about what my next job in journalism might be. So I'm hoping to learn that from our panelists. We're going to attack it from a few different levels, a few different perspectives. We've got people here who do hiring, people here whose recent careers have been really sort of at the forefront of the next sort of new shiny thing in journalism, and we have also someone who is entering the job market right now. So to kick it off, I'm going to ask a question to Matt Thompson, who's the deputy editor at The Atlantic. And Matt, I also want to give you an opportunity to sort of tell folks where you have resided previous to The Atlantic.
Sure.
But in a certain sense, when we talk about the next jobs in journalism or the skills that are in demand right now, on the one hand, that's a question that requires a crystal ball because of just, again, the rapid pace of change here. But there also are some sort of obvious, straightforward answers to that question. You want to sort of address that and also give us a chance to sort of understand your career too?
Sure. So I'll tackle the last part of that first because it's the quickest and easiest. I came to The Atlantic, guys. I'm deputy editor of TheAtlantic.com. I started in January after 5 years at NPR as a manager of mischief. And before that, I've been working for the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, the Fresno Bee, the Knight Foundation, the Reynolds Journalism Institute, the Poynter Institute. Google me, you'll find things. But to talk to the question of the job market, so you are probably, there are things that we are all aware of. We come to this with the knowledge that, if you are a top flight data journalist, app developer person, you're not going to have any trouble finding work these days. And I do think, from my perspective, hiring and looking at a lot of resumes and positions, it is useful to sort of look at the supply and demand, look at the journalism job market from a supply and demand perspective. It is not that there are not jobs in classic, straightforward, traditional reporting and writing. It's that those jobs are deeply competitive. Those are skill sets that have, for a reporting and writing job or an editing job at The Atlantic, we will get hundreds of applications. But we will be scouring for a job for a smart, top-flight social editor. We'll be looking for folks with a really unique skill set, and a skill set that's changing really rapidly as that landscape changes once a week. For data journalists, app developers, designers, we're hiring a senior designer right now. Folks who have a facility with telling stories, with images, with charts and data visualizations. Those skills are in demand, and I think will be so for the near-term future. But I do think one of the things that we'll be talking about is how to think about, during this panel, I think, is how to think about your own career and how to sort of build a sense of longevity and change and evolution along with the industry into your career path.
So I also want to say that I want to make sure that the audience has a chance to ask questions. We have a mic, though, that we'll need to use for that. So if you do have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. And we can do that at any point during the panel. And then we'll have a time that's just for questions at the end. So Matt, give me an example of a job that you've created at The Atlantic recently that didn't exist before.
Yeah, so most recently, we hired someone who is here at ONA. She might not be here in this room, but is an Annenberg grad, actually.
By pure coincidence.
Coincidentally. We hired a woman named Katie Green, who had been working at the Voice of San Diego as in various capacities over the past few years. Voice of San Diego, brilliant nonprofit journalism investigative shop in San Diego. So Katie, we crafted a position almost around Katie's unique skill set. Her title is assignment editor, and her job has two components. figure out our blind spots, figure out what our audience is curious about that we're not covering, figure out the questions that our audience has, the things that they don't know, the things that they're wondering, and then figure out how to answer those questions, figure out how to meet them, work with freelancers, work with staff, work with our own reporting and writing abilities to pull together answers, things to meet our audience's curiosity. It's a position that sits alongside, earlier this year, we created a position for an engagement editor, Chris Bodenner, who came to us from Andrew Sullivan's Daily Dish. Any former Dish readers, Daily Dish readers in the room? It's been an age in the internet. This is one of the things about the internet. I'm gonna point this out. So if I'd asked that question 10 years ago, I expect a lot of hands would have gone up. Andrew Sullivan's Daily Dish was, it moved from internet property to internet property, from first, it started independently, maybe at the New Republic, then to Time, then to the Atlantic, or maybe reverse.
Daily Beast was in there for a moment.
The Daily Beast was in there after the Atlantic, that's right. It was a very unique site. It was a one-of-a-kind thing. Chris Bodenner handled all of the reader content. One of the things about the dish was that it was filled with these letters from readers. There was no comment section, but you emailed in. And so Chris is now doing that for The Atlantic. Ta-Nehisi Coates' latest cover story, The State of the Black Family in the Age of Mass Incarceration. You'll notice a giant package of stories that have arisen, large coverage, responses from sociologists like Tressie McMillan Cottom and others, and Chris is flowing in those responses from readers after reading this story. Katie, on the other hand, Katie Green, our new assignment editor, is asking folks, so now that you've read this large story on the state of the black family in the age of mass incarceration, what do you want to know? What do you want to know about policing? What do you want to know about the Moynihan report and the after effects of that? And working to answer those questions. So Chris's role, Katie's role, these are things that did not exist before. I imagine that will be true for most of the positions that are created.
So Laura, let me ask you, first of all, now you have you work at Buzzfeed on the mobile news team, and yet you graduated from USC in 2008. I'm imagining that education that you received there probably prepared you adequately for your first job, which was as a reporter at the AP, right? So tell me a little bit about sort of the preparation that you got, and then the landscape changed on you dramatically after that. So why don't you walk us through your career path a little bit and sort of talk about kind of the skill sets that were required for those different jobs?
Sure, yeah. I mean, my education prepared me because it gave me a really good foundation as a journalist. And same thing with I was a reporting intern at the AP right after I graduated. And I feel like those fundamentals that I learned have what led me through my career. And I've just been really open to taking on new challenges. And I've stuck with those fundamentals and kept an open mind. So after I was a reporting intern at AP, I went to New York and worked for the national desk. And then I got laid off, common story, in 2008, 2009. And then I went to Yahoo News. I had done editing and reporting at the AP, but I hadn't done any online work. And Yahoo News hired me as basically a homepage editor. And then from there, I learned on the job. I wasn't on Twitter when I graduated college. I got on Twitter when I was at Yahoo News. I went to go cover Supreme Court hearings, basically to add tweets to our stories. I went all the way to DC for that, and that's why I got on Twitter. And I edited 2 blogs. I edited a blog on the midterm elections, and then I edited a blog on the royal wedding. I just kept on taking on all these new challenges that my bosses threw at me. And then I took over social media for all the Yahoo News accounts. And that was a huge challenge, and it was a big stepping point in my career, because at the time, social was still, I don't know if it wasn't new per se, but it was a big growing part of the industry, and I got to help figure that out with everybody else while it was developing and changing, and I became sort of an expert in a place where there weren't a ton of experts at the time. And then those skills are what I think attracted the LA Times to me, and they wanted me to do social there, but they also had an opening on the mobile team. And so I hadn't done mobile before. And I started as the deputy mobile editor at the LA Times, and that's where I learned all about mobile, sent the LA Times first ever push alert. And so I really developed my skills there. And then, when BuzzFeed News hired me, I hadn't created an app before. They hired me to help create the news app, and I had never created an app, but I was, again, hired on that team and excited to tackle a new challenge. So for me, my career has been like a really good foundation and really good basic skills, and then just continuing to translate those skills across a bunch of different mediums.
So in a lot of those jobs, when you were hired to do them, they were kind of so new that there wasn't any sort of commonly accepted metric of success. So what did it mean when you're creating something new? What, how did people measure success? How did you handle that, on the job where it wasn't clear what, doing a good job would actually mean?
So I also teach at Annenberg now, and one of the things I tell my students, so I teach an online media course, and one of the things we impress upon the students in this course is that digital has really opened up new newsroom leaders. I think before it was a lot of you learn from the top down, and there wasn't a lot that you taught your boss back in the day. And now with social, with mobile, whatever it may be, like I've had multiple jobs where I knew more about something than my boss did. And so it's opening us up to, like, there can be many more leaders in the newsroom and many more younger leaders. And so I think that to answer your question, you're figuring out what success means with your boss, and you can manage up, I guess, a little bit there. And so you have to be really knowledgeable about the space, and you have to, like, one thing that I'll fully cop to that's like almost a little embarrassing, but I obsessively read about the industry. I like set aside time every single day to read about the industry. You can probably tell, like, that if you watch my tweets, you can tell the time that I do it. But I mean, that's really served me well. And I honestly, the way I found out about the Buzzfeed news job was I was in Neiman Lab. I read about it in Neiman Lab, and I was like, I want to do this. So I think just really staying on top of it, and it takes time. I dedicate time to it every single day. It doesn't just naturally work into my day. I live in LA, I drive to work. So you have to set aside the time and stay on top of it, and just be obsessive about your industry, and don't be afraid to challenge your boss and help define that success. It might not look like what success has looked like on the stuff that they know about, but you need to teach your bosses.
So I imagine that there's sort of different cultures in different newsrooms, and some newsrooms are more open to that kind of challenging from coming up. Have you been in places where that wasn't necessarily appreciated?
I've definitely been in a lot of challenging situations. I don't want to make it sound really easy. Especially being like young, a lot of times people don't want to hear from you that they don't know as much as you on this particular topic. It doesn't mean that they don't know more than you on a ton of other things. And so I have met with challenges in that way, but I always try to just approach it very deferentially and very humbly, and frame it for journalists. I found a lot of successes. Frame it oftentimes with social or mobile. It's like more people are going to read your work, or more people are going to read your work and have a good experience reading your work, which is the mobile part. So I frame it around them, and not like you're doing something wrong or you're missing out on the industry. Frame it about them and how you can help them.
Okay. So, Laura, again, you graduated in 2008. Fernando, you have yet to graduate. You're obscenely young, for which I resent you. But can you tell me a little bit about your journalism education and kind of how it evolved over that time?
Yeah, so I'm a senior at USC, and I'm graduating in December, hint, hint. This is my fourth year now at USC, and I saw a huge change at Annenberg from my first 2 years to my last 2 years. In that, my beginning years, for one, I had no expectations or any standards for journalism education. I didn't know what the standard was, so I was pleased with what I was getting, and I was with great professors. But I definitely noticed that I was getting, obviously the fundamentals of journalism, writing, reporting, and a lot of news writing, and just practicing those skills. And then I think come my junior years, when I really saw kind of this evolution, it wasn't even a strict, concrete change in the curriculum per se, though that is being implemented right now. But it was more of a change in the culture of especially our student media outlets. I think it was a huge beacon of hope when awakening for me to see that we created, just a concrete example, we created a unit in our media center, which is our student-run news operation, called the Mobile and Emerging Desk. So and that's where we would create content for mobile and emerging platforms, so social media native content. And not just creating content, but also creating content with a focus on engagement. So it was no longer just, it kind of revolutionized the pitch for me, whereas before it was like, oh, I like this story, I think it's interesting, let me pitch it. Whereas now I think we're transitioning more to, you pitch a story to fulfill a certain need in an audience member, and why are you fulfilling that need, and why do you need to do it in this mode at this time and in this format, you know? So I just saw this change in like more, I guess, audience-centric.
And how did that work out sort of on a day-to-day level? What kind of stuff were you doing in the media center
Yeah.
as part of this work?
Right, so I was, I am currently the executive producer of the Mobile and Emerging Desk. So basically, it was a huge learning curve for me and for, I think, everyone in the media center. And it was a lot of iteration, iterate. So it was, if you see where we started at last year from our first work, our first Facebook video, to what we're doing now, it's totally different. It's changed, and it's kind of like you change it as you go. So it was a lot of, you produce a video this certain way, you find out it's too long, it's too short, and then you find out actually our audience, which we're very lucky to have millennials in our audience, 18 to 25, they're just not into that, so you try different topics, and you work with that, and then you try to crack the code at Snapchat. You know, how do you do Snapchat content? How do you do a Twitter content, like Twitter native content? So there's a lot of iteration and going back to the drawing board and changing things in small increments, if that makes sense.
Please.
I just want to say I'm really happy that you said audience and that that's being focused on in the journalism education. I think that if you want to prepare for the jobs of like now, not even necessarily the future, but right now, it's all about your audience. Constantly be thinking about your audience. Don't try to solve a problem for you or your news organization. Don't start with your needs. Start with your audience needs.
So, Fernando, that experience you took to kind of an interesting place to work this past summer, which was LinkedIn. And I think obviously, you know, a lot more journalism jobs are at places that we don't associate necessarily natively with journalism. Can you talk a little bit about how that kind of experience and that sort of thinking about the audience translated into what you did this summer?
Yeah, I mean, so being at LinkedIn further opened my eyes and kind of reinforced the emphasis on audience. So one of LinkedIn's their big value is members first. So obviously LinkedIn is a social media network, and you have 300 million members on there, and members come first because our product is for members. Their product, is for members, and you put their needs before ours. So it was a lot of always thinking about something bigger than yourself. It sounds cheesy, but I mean it's true, and I think that's the big element in journalism. You think of something that's bigger than yourself, and you're creating stuff for someone that's bigger than yourself. So being there, obviously we have access to all of this data from a lot of you in this room, from your salaries to everything. I know how much you make. No, I'm kidding. So it's just obviously very sensitive information. So we have all those metrics and all that data. And what that helped me and what I really learned from LinkedIn is that they're all about obviously creating stuff for members first, but also creating experiences. So that's something I never really thought of before. In content production, I thought, okay, well, you know, I'll do a story and I'll do a slideshow and a video. But it's like, well, why are you doing a slideshow and a video? You know, it makes you think like, what's the user experience like? So, you know, that was a big thing for me to think, once again, as the audience member, what experience am I giving this person when we package? An example is the LinkedIn Next Wave, if you guys heard of it. It's LinkedIn's first list, kind of like the Forbes, top 40, under 40, things like that. So one thing was to create the list and, you know, and do the video profiles and the articles. And then the other thing was to create the experience both for the readers, but also for these like very talented people. And what I really liked was that there was this focus on digital and online, but also a focus on real life. You know, I think we tend to forget about real life a lot of the times. Definitely create experiences for digital, but also think about, you know, in-person experiences. So we did this whole event in New York for those people and the public to come and, you know, learn about these people. And then another example was the LinkedIn photo booth. I don't know if you guys have seen it across the nation. It's still about creating experiences and making something pleasant to consume, I think.
Okay, so I hope you do start to get some questions here soon. Laura, let me ask you this. You've, again, sort of had these jobs for which you didn't necessarily have the skill set when you got the job. what do you say to people who want to apply for something but are possibly concerned that, you know what, I don't have that in my resume. I don't have that, all of those skills, and, I kind of wish I did, and maybe can I still apply for something even if, I don't bring necessarily the kind of experience that they're looking for?
Yeah, like I said, I think my journalism foundation has carried me through really well. So if you have that, I don't think you don't have to be like, well, I've never, sent a push alert, so I can't apply for this app job, or, you are more thinking about the consumer, and these jobs start with the consumer. So if you are a consumer and obsessed with media, and you think about what's missing from your experience and thinking about how you can make that better, then you are that is part of the skill set. Just be a consumer and think about your needs and think about the current experience in media and how you can improve that. And that's going to help you prepare for these jobs. It's not a lot about the practical application of what you've done in the past. It's about how you think things can be improved and about your experience as a consumer, and just be obsessed with it, honestly. I feel like I'm obsessed with media, and I think and read about it all the time. And I feel like that's really what prepared me to work in mobile, is just thinking about how can we improve this experience, and I know it well because I'm a consumer.
And so if people come to you applying for a job, and you've done some hiring lately, and they don't necessarily have everything on their resume that you're possibly looking for, what might convince you to hire them anyway?
So, we recently hired someone to work with me in LA, and what I was really looking for I keep going back to the fundamentals, but the basics, in journalism, and some breaking news experience. But I was, even on the job application, we were saying attitude and thinking a lot about the product experience. There's not a lot of people out there right now who have built an app or who have even worked on mobile exclusively. So, I really just wanted to screen for that attitude, and we would ask a lot, what apps do you like and why? Think about what you use and why you use it, and then think about what that experience is and how you can make it better. So it was really, I've actually told people mobile is kind of academic. It's really just about thinking a lot about it. And, I wasn't okay, so how many apps have you worked on? Or, how many push alerts have you sent when we were hiring for the job? It was more just about, do you have the basics down, and do you care about the user experience? And that was just through a lot of questioning and talking to the candidates.
So, Matt, I think it was a decade ago that you and a colleague put together a video called Epic, which I don't know how many people here have seen that. It's still very relevant. Please go check it out. It's very relevant, except for the predictions about Friendster.
Those are I don't even know what you're talking about. Those are the most relevant things in the movie.
But it was basically you were trying to
buy all the Friendster stuff.
You were trying to sort of shock a journalistic folks in the profession to really think differently about their profession and how they approached it, and to force them to embrace some of these big changes that were taking place. If you were to remake that today, how would you think about that differently?
Yeah, so the context is my buddy Robin Sloan and I, we were working at the Poynter Institute, and we made this. Well, so we started. We had, we were young, we were new budding journalists, and our first professional journalism jobs, and we were trying to figure out we had thoughts about journalism, and as consumers of media, what we wanted to see and experiences that we were having, we wanted to see reflected in the media that we sought out. And journalists were coming through Poynter, storied, venerated journalists were coming through Poynter all the time, and we were trying to say, hey, there are some real storytelling opportunities here, and there's some things that are happening in the water that you should think about. There's some things that companies like Google and even Flickr are doing that are pertinent to your work. But at the time, believe it or not, it was sort of unfathomable to a journalist coming through Poynter that Google had anything to do with journalism. It just was not a straightforward thing. It was what? It's a search engine. It has I report and write. You don't understand. I write long form stories. They don't have anything to do with the Googles.
You're channeling me here.
And so after a while, we realized the strategy of telling them these things relate to your work didn't work. And so we package that into a different type of story. We say, okay, fast forward 10 years, and this is how this is all played out. Google, Amazon have taken over the shop. They basically kicked the New York Times out of the game. How do you respond to that? And we scared the journalists, and so because we scared them, they started, Epic was the first viral thing I ever made. But the industry has changed a lot in 10 years. I don't think you could find a journalist today who would say, Google has no relationship with my profession. I just don't think that's a sentiment that you'd encounter. Okay, I'm not gonna be absolutist about that. It is a sentiment you will encounter in some places. But it will be quickly shut down, I expect. So today, if we were trying to do a similar thing, I probably actually wouldn't be talking to the journalists as much. One of the dirty little secrets of the past decade plus in media is actually that there's been a ton of invention and creativity and innovation in the editorial space. I look all around and I see outlets from the New York Times to the 157-year-old Atlantic, to Buzzfeed, to Mashable, to Fusion and Vox. I look around and I see a ton of innovation. To the Arizona Republic and the Kansas City Star. I mean, I see a ton of innovation on the editorial side in all over the industry. But one of the areas that I think that has been neglected, where I've seen less innovation and ambition and creativity and invention, has been on the business side. If I were making Epic again today, I might make it for my sales and marketing friends outside the industry. Not at the Atlantic, because they're brilliant and I love them. But elsewhere in the industry, I think that there's some galvanizing to do there about imagining how do we think in a universe beyond as formats change. How do we think beyond, classic banner ads on mobile phones?
So one thing for anyone who's done hiring, for a lot of people have just been on the sort of other side of the interview table, sort of applying for that job or looking for that job. I think one of the sort of secrets about hiring is that it's actually really tough. And if you are doing hiring, every time somebody comes in that door or you get a resume, et cetera, you're really hoping that you can actually hire this person. Quartz has a job posting now for the head of what they call their talent lab. Basically, they're sort of putting somebody in charge of the process of scouring the earth for good talent, because it can really be difficult for the employer to make that right choice.
It is the hardest, most time-consuming part of the job, hiring.
And I think that there's actually some folks who are just entering the profession should kind of keep that in mind, that when you actually have an interview, the person who's interviewing you really hopes that you're the one that they can hire, so that they can move on to the next problem. It's not, and even if they've got hundreds and hundreds of applications, still finding somebody who's quality, who can sort of perform that way, is really important. Laura, let me ask you, if you could create a job now at Buzzfeed for your mobile team, or just in general, sort of what would be the job description for that spot?
So I think the title, and this is a working title, so feel free to help me out here, is like integrator in chief. So I think what we're seeing now in digital media is a lot of this like distributed, which the BuzzFeed News app is part of that. If you've heard of like the BFF team at BuzzFeed, the distributed team, they're creating content for these platforms, just for these platforms where people are. And that's part of what social media is about too, like finding people where they are. I'm sure finding readers where they are. I'm sure you've heard that term before. And that's part of like integrating the news experience into your everyday life. And I think that now we have a ton of that out there. We have I get push alerts on my watch, on my laptop, on my phone, and we're getting all this information in all these different ways, which is awesome and great. And that's part of like what I do at BuzzFeed. But I think I want to see us kind of take that experience and streamline it into someone's day in a more seamless way and in a more integrated way, in terms of like, okay, if I get this push on my phone, I'm not going to get it on the laptop as well. Like the news org is going to know, like, I don't need it, I already saw it on my desktop. Or bringing news into like the spaces of your day, like fitting it into the cracks of your life in a really, really seamless way. I think this is going to become more relevant with wearables. You see things like Google Now. You can get a little piece of audio on your drive to work or whatever. So I think that, and that's like, especially as like an Angelino has to drive and I want to consume a lot of content. I'm jealous of everyone who takes the train to work. I want to consume this content, and so I think a lot about about that. Like, and there's not like I'm not, you know, reading news when I'm in the shower. Is that an opportunity? You know, everything is an opportunity, and that's part of what mobile is about.
You have a drought here, Laura.
Sorry, I take quick showers for the record. But, you know, I want to see us integrating it more into people's lives and fitting news more seamlessly. I think of journalism as a public service, and everyone knows that, but journalism is an information service. And that's what we're doing with mobile, and we're trying to like deliver that information in the most audience-friendly way possible and in the most seamless way possible. So I think we're getting there with like distributed and all that stuff, but I now think we need to take it to the next level and think about how we can filter that into your life in a seamless way.
You know, in terms of just sort of themes that I'm picking up, I mean, from both Fernando and Laura, but also I think throughout this conference, is just the importance of this notion of the experience, which, you know, was previously so well defined by the medium itself, but has now kind of become this sort of open season thing. And I think it's, you know, it's something to really kind of take away from the entire ONA conference. Fernando, you are now sort of on the job market and talking to folks who, you know, different organizations. What are you sort of picking up about their needs in the marketplace and the kind of talent that they're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I might be telling you guys stuff you know already because this is off like preliminary interviews and, you know, simple job searches. But what I've been seeing a lot of is there's a huge emphasis on like social content producers. Which there's already people in those positions, but there's this huge notion, and people I've talked to, like, oh, so what experience do you have, you know, building audiences and creating content for audiences? So that's one side of it, and then this other side that I understand does not apply to every company, but a few people I've interviewed have have almost given me, not me the authority, but like given me the liberty to help craft the position, because obviously they're hiring to fill a business need, which is obvious. That's why you hire people, to fill a business need. But then they're also anticipating future business needs. So I had an interview with a company, and my would-be boss was talking about, you know, this is kind of your immediate the immediate business need you're filling, which would be as an associate producer. So creating shows, content, you know, scheduled content. And then we kind of want to anticipate what's coming next. So the company is really trying to appeal to a younger audience. So how could I help with that? You know, and in that case, goes back to the social part and the audience and the engagement and building audiences. So I think it's been a lot of that and storytelling positions that are looking for storytellers that engage with people, I guess.
So, I mean, I think that's actually a very interesting point that you raised, that, you know, when you're hiring somebody these days, you're really hiring somebody to replace you, and that can be a little anxiety-producing. But Matt, you're in a newsroom now that you are essentially also trying to build a newsroom for the future, right? And we don't know what it's going to look like, but we do have some sort of idea about the direction that it's going, and again, sort of engagement, which is a term that is used, you know, possibly too often and can mean a lot of different things. Experience is another. What is the sort of contours of this newsroom that you're trying to create?
Well, we talk about the types of people that I'm hoping to hire. I want to talk about Jim Fallows for a second. Jim Fallows is one of the Atlantic's most recognized journalists. He's been at the Atlantic for a long time, doing fantastic, path-breaking reporting and storytelling. Jim, one of the things he's most recognized for is his his classic long-form stuff. Now, Jim, to give you a sense of Jim's sort of his stature, Jim was a speechwriter for Jimmy Carter's when he was president. So you can sort of age him out from that point. Jim will always have a job in journalism. Why? Because of two things, I would say. One, his intense curiosity, which is a quality that I look for in every reporter. I want people who are intrinsically driven by a sense of wanting to discover something about the world. That paired with an intense drive to tell stories, and it doesn't matter how. The very best storytellers that I've encountered, they are not wedded to words or images or Vines or Snapchat. They are wedded to people. They're wedded to communication. They're wedded to the art of telling stories. They're driven by these two drives that fuel one another, a drive to discover and a drive to share, a drive to spread the things that they learn, the truth that they discover as journalists, as widely as they possibly can. And those intrinsic desires, if I can find people that have those two things, those twin engines, curiosity and a desire to share, and are really driven by those things, then they will learn every Snapchat that comes along, if that's the best way to tell their story. And they will find new things, discovery. That is one of the most powerful things that we produce in journalism. So when I think about the newsroom that I'm trying to create, really, it is a newsroom filled with people who have those two qualities, storytelling. I got into this business, in part, the path that led me here started, like I imagine many of you all, with people telling me, hey, you're a good writer, you're decent with this word stuff. And, what's that? I just repeated that last. And one of the things I hadn't expected to discover about myself was how much I would come to one day love coding. As a way of telling stories. When I was co-writing the NPR ethics handbook, part of the job of writing that handbook was actually coding the templates in WordPress, deciding the logic in WordPress for how the handbook would work, which actually interacted in a curious way with how we formulated the ethical guidance that we crafted. That's a long, complex thought, and I could talk more about it offline. But my point is, I had no idea when I got into this space how interested I would be in the number of ways that I could tell stories. And I think that's an important quality to always nourish.
So let me ask both you, Matt, and Laura, who do hiring now. It used to be that if you're looking at resumes and you see somebody's hopping from spot to spot, and their average tenure is a year or less, that raises flags, obviously. Is that still the case, or is that potentially a point in somebody's favor?
When I left NPR after 5 years, someone shook my hand on the last day and said, hey, you pulled a real hit and run job on us, didn't you? Which, no, 5 years is a perfectly respectable amount of time to spend at a company in 2015. So is a year. I mean, our careers take different trajectories, and I am paying much less attention to how long did they spend at this place, because believe me, I will call your references, and I will call people that you did not list as your references at your organization, and I will find out the dirt, all right? If I'm going to hire you, I know the dirt, just believe me. It matters less to me, I understand, among the things of the people that I bring in and I want to hire and develop at The Atlantic is I want them to spread throughout the world and tell their best stories and fulfill the journalists that they want to be. I feel committed to the people that I take onto my team. I want to develop them. I want them to be their best selves. And sometimes that will be at The Atlantic, sometimes that will be elsewhere, and I'm committed to that. Look for bosses, by the way, who take that commitment to you, and who promise you that, who do develop you, who can guide and mentor you and coach you. Look for bosses who you will want to keep as mentors, even after you are not under their purview any longer. So the amount of time that someone spent in a place is less material to me than how they can fulfill and develop in the role that I have for them. I think the question, the length of time at a place was once used as a measure of how committed are they to a job or how flighty are they, and that's not I think there are other ways to get at that question.
Yeah, I think that everything we do in media now is so much more public. We're all up in each other's business, and there's this whole idea of like the personal brand, and people are building that, and they're going different places. And I'm with you. Like I don't judge someone for not being somewhere very long. I was only at the LA Times for a year and 8 months. And at the LA Times, that was a weird thing. It was kind of like, well, okay, bye, because people are there for 25, 30 years. But when I was at Yahoo News for almost 4 years. And in the time, my age, and at the time, I was like, man, like, am I getting stale? I kind of was like, wow, 4 years, that's a long time in the digital space. And I think too, something that's, if you move around a lot, I wouldn't say like too often, but a year is like, it's pretty good. And if you move around a lot, it shows that, you're valuable and you can do a lot of different things. I don't judge it.
Okay, excellent. I'd love to hear from folks in the audience. I know we've got a range here. We've got a question up front, and I see that there's also a bunch of students too. So please, and identify yourself as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bruce Kuhn. I'm the news director of news operations at KQED in San Francisco. By the way, we have openings, not a lot of entry levels, but come and see me. I wanted to follow up on Matt's question, and it wasn't so much about next jobs, and I'd be curious whether the panel or even people in the room, the others, and actually following up on Laura's point about doing so much. And Matt discussed storytelling and finding the means to do it best. There was a time, and Matt and others will remember this, there was the so-called backpack journalist. And I think the guy with USA Today sort of gets credited. And the notion was that this individual could be equally adept at taking photographs, taking video, writing the story, and they didn't even have social engagement at that time. In this new period, to what degree are we still looking for or anticipating the skills by which the individual can actually be really good at more than one of those, and whether it's even needed to be passable anymore, because you don't want to just have bad video. And we're starting to hire in a lot of newsrooms back to someone who is really good in one of those tasks. So the question is how much do those skill sets of being able to do more than one thing, especially on the storytelling, matter anymore?
That's an excellent question. Matt, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I mean, so really part of what you're asking there is there's a tension between being a specialist and being a generalist, right? There's a tension between really diving deep and really honing your craft in one aspect of the work, and between being malleable and being able to tell a whole variety of stories and doing almost anything that is demanded of you. That is a genuine tension that exists. And I think there are different types of journalists who perform best in either mode. I believe you me, I believe that there is someone who is going to figure out how to tell the most compelling story on a lock screen or on a notification screen. There is a journalist out there, probably at Buzzfeed, probably on Stacey Marie's team, who is going to figure out the most compelling way of telling a story on a lock screen, right? That is going to be a thing that happens. Hopefully that journalist is intrinsically motivated enough that when lock screens are not a thing that we pay attention to anymore, that they will figure out the next sort of boutique wonderful story that they can craft. But I think one of the ways of making that decision for yourself and in the things that you learn, one is that you are always learning. Our technology is going to continue to change. The technology on which we consume stories, the one thing that you can count on is that all of this is going to continue to evolve, and that the methods that you take, the techniques that you develop for telling stories today are not going to be the exact same ones that you use for telling stories 5 years from now. So that you, whether you take a generalist pathway and what you are learning is constantly how to tell a variety of different types of stories, which is one approach, and there are several types of jobs that will work for that type of journalist, or whether you want to become the best-in-class journalist for a particular specialty that you see as being really important right now, both for the industry or for society. That, I think, is dependent on you and how you learn and develop best. Both paths, I think, are viable.
And, I mean, one thing I would tell you for, if you're thinking about, okay, this person's a generalist, don't think about it so much maybe in the aggregate, but look at the quality of each thing that they do. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, because they can do a lot of things that they're, bad at all of them. Like I feel like maybe I need to stick up for generalists because I've worn a lot of hats in my career, as I said, and I don't think I was a bad homepage editor, and I was a bad blog editor, and I was medium at all of these things. I think that I did a good job at everything I did. So look at the individual quality of each thing, and that will say a lot about the person's personality and attitude. I think that there are, frankly, different personality types for different jobs, and it's about finding balance for your newsroom. Like, not everyone in your newsroom should be a generalist, and not everyone in your newsroom should be an expert in one topic. There are different types of jobs that work for those different skill sets. So really think about the balance and think about attitude. I think you touched on this a lot. It's really, if I've learned one thing working in these types of jobs and teaching people new skills, it's not about really hardly anything else except your attitude, except whether you're willing to take on new challenges and whether you want to try this.
Okay, excellent. Other questions here in the audience, please? And I just, can we get the mic over there? And I also kind of want to add to that, there is definitely a path to convergence in this. In fact, I was speaking with the FT.com editor who said that they've collapsed two different types of job categories into one. They used to have web producers and news editors. And the news editor would tell the reporter what to go and report, and the web producer would try to sort of package that. And now that's actually one job, which gives that person a lot more authority. And that's obviously part of the evolution of this industry. Please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Al Castro. I represent Cal State LA's radio station. Actually, Professor Kahn, you and I are on each other's Twitter feed.
Yes, we are. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I particularly run the news program on the radio. I'm the chief anchor. And the school sent me here to get whatever information that I can. In relevance to this conference, I'm asking you, what can I bring back to the students that I work with that specialize in radio and television, that are looking for careers in there, that you can help with the skills that we're looking to get for the future from here that could help them?
So I can speak to radio a little bit. I mean, I just came from 5 years at NPR. I feel like I come from radio land to a certain extent, and I listen still a lot. Like when and I think that's a really important skill to cultivate. I think any type of journalist you are, just like being voracious in reading and listening and watching. If your bent is towards words, reading everything in the specialties that you, or the subjects that incline towards you. Reading, listening, watching, and consuming a lot just gives you a good sense of who is doing things that you like. Which enables you to get a better sense of how do I do that thing even better? Or how do I do that thing almost as well, which is another important thing to ask, particularly early in your career. So, in that sense, listening a lot. If I were in radio right now, I would be listening probably more to podcasts than I would be listening to Marketplace, then I would be listening to Marketplace. Not an NPR show. There's a lot of innovation going on in storytelling, and I would be figuring out, like, from all those things that I can listen to. I got like 30 podcast feeds on my phone right now. From all those things that I could listen to, I'd be figuring out, what do I love here? What do I love here that really seems to be working, and how do I do that better than those people?
I think that you can't be underestimated in the digital space to like embrace your identity, embrace your inner nerd, like be yourself. Like you can, and one thing I tell my students, this isn't a direct answer to your question, but one thing I tell my students is like, if you want to do something, like there's no excuse. Like start a newsletter, be awesome on social media, start a YouTube channel, write on Tumblr. Like there's no excuse to say, I want to do this, but I can't. You can do it. So just get out there and do it. And I think the thread of storytelling that Matt touched on probably would have been about my answer to your
Fernando,
question as well.
Can I hear from you on this too? Because traditionally at Annenberg we have, in years past, sent people to a local TV station, to, even local radio stations, and we were very kind of platform specific in the way that we did that. That's changing now a lot. And so people who think about themselves as being good audio people, et cetera, how do they think about themselves on the job market?
Yeah, at least I can only speak for myself, but I've had like this just like general tendency to always be learning something new, obviously because I'm in school, but outside of school. So on my own time, that's what Saturdays are for, Saturday mornings. You do that, watch some tutorials, whether it's technical or, more soft skills. So my advice like to fellow peers is like always be learning something new, whether it's, Python or whether it's French or whether, something new will always benefit you. And then the other thing that I want to say that someone told me, was that there's this importance of voice now, increasingly so, for people to have a voice, we all have a voice, physically speaking, but develop a voice, and it's kind of, the lines get blurry with journalism, but like where I've interned and where I've interviewed, there's like this, people like people, people like to know more about people, the more people know about you, the better I think your chances are of getting hired. So it almost comes down to, you're like you said, you're a good culture fit.
This
And
is
then-
actually a great point.
Yeah.
I mean, networking is something we haven't spoken much about, but it is a key part of the act of getting a job. Like actually talking to people, being visible in the industry. Okay, and here's a little secret for introverts. The way introverts network is they publish stuff about what they learn on like Neiman Lab. The way that extroverts network is they go to events like this and they say, "Hi, I'm Fernando." And do that. No, do that. If you like, seriously, that is the way to win the game. I mean, and when you think about networking, also, and you think about recommendations are also a big part of the hiring process. When you get recommendations from people, when you're seeking recommendations from people, the most important thing to me as a hiring manager is not that the person knows me; it's that the person knows you. If a good recommendation, if someone comes in blind, a total stranger to me says, "Listen, Matt, hire Fernando. This kid came in and he just mastered this model of storytelling that we were trying to do at USC." That is going to be a much more valuable and much more. I'm going to act on that recommendation. I'm more likely to act upon that than the colleague who, like, I am sort of 2 degrees of separation from, but who I know and who says, "Hey, I have a friend here. You should talk to him."
Yeah, really quickly, I think also think of yourself as a movie. So movies that do well in the box office are high concept movies, movies that you can sell with 3 words. So if someone knows you, going back to your question about, are you just good at audio or video? Someone knows you like, oh, he's a video production master. If people can sell you, they think of you like, oh no, Fernando, video production master.
That's true, by the way. If you've ever seen Fernando's video work. Anyone else here? We have a question in the back.
Hello, Eric Sampson. I'm the head of the journalism program in the San Francisco de Quito University in Ecuador. I have a question about the rhythm. We tried as a university to maintain us as actualized as possible, but arming a class, a syllabi, looking for teacher, and then suddenly that it takes some time. We have a process of accreditation with our government that is looking at every verb we use, the verbal time we use. So it takes a lot of time, and sometimes we have difficulties to keep the pace between the evolution of technology. So how do you do that? I mean, we try to maintain the basic classes and the other one, the digital classes, as actualized as possible. But how do you maintain the teachers, in particular, the pace between that? I mean, are you able to maintain classes, technological classes, valid even if there is a desactualization of techniques?
So I think that's a good question, right? I mean, from the journalism school perspective, historically, journalism schools have been a place where journalists go to die, right? Oh God, I got a professor job, now I can just coast. And that's no longer, that's what I was hoping for. And it's not, unfortunately, what I found, because the industry is changing so quickly, so that I think we all feel the pressure to always be updating our skills and making sure that we are preparing people adequately for a job market. Fernando, I want to ask you, one of the things that, in speaking to you about this, that you said was that you're essentially working out questions with your professors in cases in which nobody knows the answer, right? Talk just a little bit about how you approach that.
Yeah, so for the unit that I lead at Annenberg, I have 2 faculty advisors, one of which is here, Amara. So it's a lot of kind of knowing your limitations, knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, and trying to figure out what you don't know and how to solve that and how to make it into a known. So it's really cool because it's I don't know, I guess I was all my life I was used to going to school and your professor or your teacher kind of hands down knowledge and you're good for the day. But here it's a lot of, once again, going back to the iteration thing, it's where we're all at the drawing board and we're both learning. They help me out with the amazing connections they have in the industry and the experience they have working, either currently or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So it's cool because I think I see it in my classes too, where it's kind of a show and tell and a give and take between students and professors, especially in the journalism school.
And I mean, that can be a very uncomfortable thing for the professor to admit, that like, I really don't know the answer to this either. And it requires a certain approach. Let me ask to the panel here sort of a twist on that same question, because I see that we have a range of ages here in the room, and as the eldest person on this panel, I think I can say it. One of the problems that we've had in newsrooms is that a lot of the experience has left the building, right? And you have a lot of places where you've got some very eager, capable, competent young people without the same levels of experience. And people look at that from different ways. There's a lot of sort of complaining and hand-wringing about that among some people. But what about people who have a lot of experience but don't necessarily fit into a mobile-focused modern newsroom? Is there ageism here? How can we address this, and how can we make use of that experience?
I think, to tie back to something that Laura said, or a theme that was implicit in Laura's remarks, leadership is something that is demonstrated, not conferred. Leadership is a thing that I am constantly looking for all over my newsroom. I am looking for great leaders. I'm looking for great managers, great editors. Editors are solid gold. Someone who has deep familiarity, and they're the hardest folks to hire. Someone who can really either structure and shape a story or develop a writer, author, storyteller. That is a skill that is so rare and so powerful because you are a capacity builder. And so I think that's one of the things as you advance in your career, one of the things that you're trying to do is figure out how to translate the things that you've learned, how to coach the people that work with you, work alongside you, or for you, in taking those same skill sets and learning them themselves. That discipline and the ability to do that, and I certainly know for the folks, for the leaders, the mentors, the coaches that have helped and helped me every single day. And have all throughout my career, again, solid gold, and I have no fear that they will ever not have a place.
I think they might have a fear. Laura, what about you? I mean, Buzzfeed is, a sort of millennial-driven, or we think of it that way, operation. Could someone, let's just say my age, walk into that newsroom and find a role?
I really think this goes back to what I've been saying about attitude, to be honest. I mean, I think that BuzzFeed is made up of, journalists of all ages. Yes, it skews younger for sure. But I think it's just, you said a journalist wouldn't fit into a mobile-focused newsroom. But I really hope that no one would feel that way about it and feel like, oh, I don't fit in here. This is just the way the industry is going, and we can't really change it. And you need to start. It's about yourself. It's not about what other people are doing. And you're like, oh, well, they're not like me. I don't fit in with them. It's like, this is where the industry is, and you just, like I said, be a consumer. Start using this stuff. Start to understand it, and you will then be just as passionate about it as someone someone like me is, because you will be you will see the frustrations and you will see the holes, and you will want to change it. So it's about being responsible for yourself and making sure that you have the attitude to fit in anywhere.
Okay, that's strangely comforting to hear. We have time for one more question here. Is anyone in the audience? Oh, this is terrifying. A room full of journalists and no questions.
Oh,
Here we go. Oh, there we go. So I'm sorry. Wherever you can get the mic there, Kylie.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Wade Kaufman. I am actually a product of the journalism school at USC, but that was...
I hope you're employed as well.
That was 10 years ago.
Okay.
In the year I finished, I co-founded a website called TruthDig.
Oh, of course.
So the industry's changed a lot in that time. When I was there, we were the first class of what was called convergence, and it was really emphasis on broadcasting, print, and web, but it was really way before the whole social explosion. Actually, we started the same year as Twitter and the Huffington Post. So we go back, and I'm just really curious now. For the first time, it's actually 8 years now that I've had the same director of social media. We need a new social media director. And I'm just curious how you teach your new class, the new group, what you tell them about. I understand certainly what Matt's saying about new sense and having what's required in terms of in the kind of feverish impulses and finding stories and the drive. But it's really right now we're really defaulting to our regular writers doing a lot of the social elements, and I'm wondering how you differentiate with your students, and is it a different person, and how you're encouraging this next phase and where social fits into all of
So
it.
I think there's a lot in there, and so we've got some people on the panel, and I think even some other folks in the audience who might want to take a crack at that. But one thing that we actually now have is this media center, which is just to plug it, if you have the opportunity to go check it out, which is a great canvas upon which to experiment. And I think that's really where we do a lot of the social media sort of practice. Which is sort of throwing up a lot of spaghetti and sort of seeing what works. Fernando, you want to talk a little bit about your experience in terms of who's responsible for that role, how it works, and how it's imparted?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest challenge has been turning analytics into insights, which I'm guessing is a hard part for a lot of people. But we're lucky in that we have, we're a converged newsroom. We hear that word every day. But we have the PR students are in the newsroom, and they're the ones who are cranking out all the data for us. And it's a pod that's dedicated to just doing that, seeing how our stories are performing, but not just that, also helping us build those stories. So if we need user-generated content, or if we need statistics on, we did this one story on the USC-UCLA game and who was winning on Twitter in terms of emotion, like the tweets, who was having more positive tweets, who was having more negative tweets. So that's how it is right now, but I think where we're trying to go is actually kind of how the direction I think you're already in, which is, integrating it into the storyteller's position, where you think about these things and how do what you tweet is part of your story as well, and that's just in the basics of Twitter. But.
And good writers are great on social media. I learned that at the Times. I mean, I was teaching people, not how to use Twitter, but teaching them more about Twitter. And then I'm like, oh, I'm a social media expert, ooh. And then they're writing like tweets that were so brilliant, like I couldn't have thought of that. So, those skills transfer.
Okay, excellent. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I do want to thank our panelists, Matt Thompson, Fernando Hurtado, and Laura Davis. Thank you very much.
If you're a designer or a developer, come give me your card.